For years, the combat veteran Nick Miller found his only peace, his only certainty, in the quiet, shared routines with his companion, Toby, a retired service dog. But on one crisp autumn morning, that routine was violently shattered. Toby, the very definition of discipline and obedience, suddenly defied every command. His amber eyes, burning with a strange, deep urgency, pulled Nick, hard, off their familiar mountain path. The dog led him to a place long abandoned, an old mine entrance, almost swallowed by the trees, lost to time. Deep inside the cold, unforgiving earth, Toby unearthed not a trapped animal, but something far more devastating. A small, tarnished piece of silver. It was a child's bracelet. Engraved upon it was a name that had been the unspoken grief, the quiet sorrow, of the entire town for 2 long years. Blank, _ blank. The morning silence in Pine Ridge. It was a language Nick Miller knew intimately, better than words. It was a silence rich with meaning. The whisper of wind through the giant pines, the chatter of a squirrel, and the slow, steady thud of his own heart. He sat on the porch of his plain cabin, a stark fortress of solitude he'd built against the world, watching the sun's first rays pour like liquid gold over the jagged peaks of the Colorado Rockies. Nick seemed carved from that same rugged land. At 52, his tall frame was lean, possessing the dense, sinewy strength of a life lived always on the edge. His brown hair, cut short in a style that never quite left the military, was surrendering to a distinguished silver at the temples. A thick, neatly trimmed beard did little to soften the hard lines etched around his eyes and mouth, lines that spoke of duties performed and sights no one should ever see. Yet beneath that harsh exterior, his eyes held a deep, profound kindness. His daily uniform was simple, a worn flannel over a gray t-shirt, softened by countless washes, and faded jeans. On his feet were the same sturdy work boots he relied on to carry him through any terrain. Beside him, lying with quiet dignity, was the only other soul who shared his isolated world. This was Toby, a 9-year-old German shepherd. But to call him just a pet would be an insult to their bond. He was a fellow veteran. His coat, a magnificent tapestry of salt and pepper gray with flashes of white, was his only soft feature. His muzzle was frosted with the white of age, yet his amber eyes were as sharp and intelligent as ever. Toby was a retired military working dog, a canine specialist, separated from service by the same piece of shrapnel that had left a faint silvery scar above Nick's left hip. They were 2 old soldiers, decommissioned by a world that had moved on, finding their final watchpost here in the mountains, quiet embrace. Nick took a slow sip of black coffee, the steam freezing instantly in the crisp air. The ritual was always the same: coffee, silent communion with the mountains, then the walk. Today, however, was different. Today, he would hunt. Not for sport, not entirely for food, but for the focus it demanded. A clear objective that could silence the ghosts whispering in the quiet moments. My blank _ blank. An hour later, they moved through the woods with an economy of motion earned from years of joint practice. Nick's steps were silent, his breathing tight. Toby glided ahead, a gray shadow between the golden aspens and dark pines. His presence was a silent, absolute assurance at Nick's side. They were tracking a white-tailed doe, her tracks delicate in the damp earth. It was in a small clearing, where the sun burst through the canopy in brilliant, piercing shafts, that Nick saw her. The doe stood utterly alone, head raised, testing the wind. She was graceful, beautiful, and completely vulnerable. In that instant, the Colorado wilderness dissolved. The scent of pine was replaced by the stinging smell of dust and sun-baked mud. The year was 2009. The place, a village outside Kandahar. The image hit him not as a memory, but as a staggering blow. The sun was a hammer. The air was thick with smoke and fear. He wasn't holding a rifle. He was holding the hand of a small Afghan girl, no older than 8, her other hand clutching a bright, defiant red kite. She was alone in the chaos. He'd promised to get her to the safe zone. Her name was Anila. He remembered the feel of her small, trusting hand in his. He remembered that brilliant red kite against the dusty brown landscape. He remembered the high-pitched whine that came a second before the world turned to fire and noise. And he remembered seeing that red kite, torn and broken, lying in the street afterward. Nick. The voice was his own, a ragged whisper ripped from his throat. He blinked. The Afghan sun vanished, replaced by the dappled light of the forest. The doe was gone. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, desperate drumbeat of failure. He leaned against the pine, breath coming in ragged gasps. The rifle in his hand felt impossibly heavy. Toby was instantly there, no longer a scout but a sentry, pressing his solid, reassuring weight against Nick's leg. The dog whined softly, a low, concerned thrum, nudging Nick's hand with his wet nose. That was the anchor Nick needed. "I'm okay, boy," he managed, scratching the dog's head. "I'm okay." But he wasn't. The ghosts were too loud today. The hunt was over. The focus shattered. Now he needed a new mission, something to outrun the memories. His mind latched onto something. A story he'd heard from Old Man Henderson at the general store weeks ago. Local rumors about the old, whispering mine, an abandoned shaft, deep in the least traveled part of the national forest. Folks said it was haunted, a place to be avoided. A perfect destination. "Come on, Toby," he said, his voice regaining its old strength. "Let's go see about some ghosts." They changed direction, heading deeper into the rugged hills where the old mines were cut into the mountainside. For the first mile, Toby trotted contentedly at his side. But as they neared the described area, the dog's whole demeanor shifted. It was a change Nick knew intimately. He'd seen it 100 times in the field. Toby's ears swiveled forward, locking onto something unseen. His relaxed trot tightened into a stiff, purposeful walk. His tail, usually curved, lowered and became rigid. His nose, which had been casually sampling the forest's scents, now pointed directly at the ground, utterly fixated. This was not a dog tracking a squirrel or a bear. This was Toby the operator, the K9 specialist, on a mission. Nick stopped and knelt beside him. "What is it, boy? What have you got?" Toby ignored him, his entire focus consumed by the scent. He pulled forward, powerful shoulders straining against the harness. Nick, intrigued, followed. He trusted Toby's instincts more than his own. The dog led him off the faint trail, pushing through thick thorn bushes and over moss-covered rock. The air here was suddenly cooler, heavy with the smell of damp stone. As Nick concentrated, he smelled it too. It was incredibly faint, almost lost beneath the pine and decaying leaves. But it was the smell of humanity, stale, old, mingled with the metallic tang of the earth. It was a smell that simply did not belong here. Toby's excitement grew into a low, controlled whine. He wasn't tracking now, he was closing in. He led Nick to a sheer rock face, a wall of granite and overgrown ivy that looked impenetrable. Toby didn't stop. He pawed frantically at a thick curtain of ancient ivy and tangled roots, whining with urgency. Nick pushed the heavy vegetation aside. Behind it, like a secret waiting to be told, was a dark, narrow opening. A rotten, crumbling wooden frame was all that remained of the mine entrance. The darkness within was absolute, swallowing the autumn light. The air that seeped out was icy, carrying that same faint, wrong scent. Toby stood at the threshold, emitting a low, steady growl from deep in his chest. His hackles were raised. They had found something hidden for a very, very long time. Blank, underscore, blank. The soldier in Nick took over, before the man could hesitate. His first instinct, establish security. He placed a firm hand on Toby's neck, murmuring a low, steady command. "Easy, boy. Stand down." Watch Toby's growl subsided into a low, watchful rumble, vibrating through Nick's hand. The dog obeyed, but his body remained a coiled spring of tension. Nick trusted that tension. It meant the threat, or the memory of it, was very real. Ignoring the entrance for a moment, Nick's gaze swept the immediate area in a practiced, methodical arc. His mind, once haunted by the ghosts of Kandahar, was now sharp and clear, processing details with the cold efficiency of a threat assessment. The rumors were just stories. This was tangible. His eyes caught a patch of disturbed soil near some ferns. He knelt, his knees barely making a sound. There, faint but undeniable, was the partial print of a small shoe. Its edges were softened by time and rain, but the shape was visible to a trained eye. It was old. He scanned further. A low branch on a cherry bush was cleanly snapped downward, not frayed by wind or snow. It was the mark of someone pushing their way through in a hurry, someone smaller than him. The pieces clicked into place with grim certainty. This wasn't a haunted mine. It was a place someone had been. Someone had been kept here. With his heavy-duty flashlight in hand, Nick gave Toby a quiet command. Forward. The dog moved into the opening without hesitation. Nick followed. The sudden change from the bright day to the profound darkness was instantly disorienting. The air became heavy, cold, and stripped of life. It tasted of damp stone, wet rot, and that faint, underlying scent of old sorrows. His light sliced through the blackness, revealing a narrow, descending, timber-supported tunnel. The silence here was different from the forest's peace. It was a dead, oppressive weight that seemed to absorb sound. Toby didn't pause. He moved with purpose down the main shaft, ignoring a collapsed side tunnel. His claws clicked softly on the rocky floor. About 50 yards in, the tunnel opened into a slightly larger chamber, where the original miners had followed a vein of ore. Rotted timbers and rusted tools, artifacts of a forgotten time, were scattered on the ground. It was here that Toby became violently agitated. He veered into a recess in the rock wall, a small alcove barely large enough for a person to lie down. It was the most sheltered spot. The dog began to whine, a high-pitched sound of distress, and started digging frantically at the loose dirt and rock at the base of the wall. "Toby, hold," Nick commanded, voice sharp but steady. The dog stopped, panting, looking back at Nick with desperate urgency. Nick knelt. The flashlight beam was focused exactly where Toby had indicated. He saw nothing but disturbed earth, but Toby had never been wrong. Nick holstered his light, took off his gloves, and began to dig with his bare hands. The ground was cold and damp. His fingers brushed against something hard and cool, not a rock. Carefully, he excavated the object. It was small, metallic, caked with dirt. He wiped it clean against the rough fabric of his jeans. It was a child's bracelet. A delicate silver chain, now tarnished dark. A small flat plate was attached. He angled it into the flashlight beam. Engraved on the silver in a simple looped script was a single word: Robin. The name hung in the dead air of the mine. A silent scream. As Nick stared at it, the silver seemed to grow cold in his hand, a cold that seeped into his bones and straight into his memory. The red kite image faded, replaced by another from that same day in Kandahar. After the dust had settled, after the screaming had stopped, he'd walked through the rubble and found a small hand-carved wooden bird. Its paint was chipped, its wings broken. He'd picked it up, knowing it belonged to Anila. It was so small, so innocent, a fragile piece of a life just extinguished. Holding it then, its utter uselessness, its inability to turn back time, had crushed him. Now, holding this bracelet, he felt that exact same weight. Blank, underscore, blank. But then, something else rose through the grief. Not despair, but a cold, hard resolve. The wooden bird had been an epilogue to a tragedy. This bracelet felt like a call to action. He looked at the name again. Robin. He knew, with every fiber of his being, that her story would not end the same way as Anila's. Not if he could help it. He stood up, movement stiff, and placed the bracelet carefully in his pocket. "Good boy, Toby," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Good find." He backed out of the mine, his mind already cataloging, planning. The haunted man who had entered the woods that morning was gone. The soldier had returned, not to fight an enemy abroad, but to wage war against a ghost at home. Once outside, he walked until his phone showed a single bar of service. He scrolled through his contacts and pressed the name he knew he could trust. It rang twice before a calm, familiar voice answered. "Tom Jenkins." "Tom, it's Nick Miller." A slight pause. Then warmth entered the sheriff's voice. "Nick, good to hear from you. Everything all right up there on your mountain?" "Not exactly," Nick said, his tone flat, professional, devoid of small talk. "I'm in the old forest sector, north of the Black Creek tributary. I found something at the Whispering Mine." The warmth in the sheriff's voice vanished, replaced by the crisp authority of a lawman. "What did you find?" "Signs of long-term habitation and a piece of personal property. A child's silver bracelet with the name Robin engraved on it." The silence on the other end was heavy with meaning. The name Robin was infamous in the county, a little girl who had vanished from a local park 2 years ago, leaving a permanent scar on the community. "Are you certain?" Nick Tom's voice was low. "I am." "All right, read me your coordinates." Exactly, Nick gave them, his voice steady. "Okay," Tom said, "I'm on my way. Do not go back in there, do not touch anything else. Secure the area and wait for me. I'll be there as fast as I can." Nick slid the phone back into his pocket. He looked at the mine entrance, then at Toby, who had taken up a seated position, watching the trail. They were on watch again, 2 old soldiers guarding a sacred, terrible place. A new mission had begun, and this time, failure was not an option. Blank_blank. The waiting was familiar to Nick. He'd spent a significant portion of his life waiting for orders, for extraction, for the tension of a mission to break. He and Toby stood sentry at the edge of the trees, a silent 2-man unit. The first to arrive was Sheriff Tom Jenkins. His SUV navigated the rough, unpaved track with practiced ease. Tom was a solid man in his late 50s with a weathered face that spoke of a lifetime under the Colorado sun. "Nick," he said, his voice low, approaching. He gave Toby a respectful nod. "You holding up?" "I'm fine, Tom," Nick replied, levelly. "The scene is untouched." Just as you said, Tom's gaze went to the hidden mine entrance. A heavy sigh escaped him. "Robin Miller. I was a deputy when that call came in 2 years ago. We searched these woods for months." He looked back at Nick, his expression grim. "Never thought we'd be back here. For this." Before they could say more, the sound of other vehicles grew louder. The FBI had arrived. 2 black SUVs, clinical and imposing, pulled up. Doors opened, and a team emerged. Their quiet, focused energy instantly transforming the clearing from wilderness into a federal crime scene. Leading them was Detective Sarah Reed, late 30s, dark hair pulled back in a severe, practical ponytail. Her face was sharp, intelligent, her movements precise. She carried an air of contained intensity, a mind already steps ahead. She conferred briefly with Tom before approaching Nick. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice clear and professional, devoid of warmth. "I'm Detective Reed. Thank you for your call. We appreciate your diligence in preserving the scene." She looked him over, taking in his rugged appearance and the watchful dog. "He was a key witness. Nothing more. Sheriff Jenkins has vouched for you, but I'll need you to walk me through your discovery, step by step. Then my team will need the area clear." Nick recounted the morning's events, his report concise and factual, as if debriefing a commanding officer. He spoke of Toby's behavior, the subtle signs at the entrance, and the bracelet's discovery. He omitted the raw emotion. It was not relevant to the mission. Detective Reed listened without interruption. "Thank you, Mr. Miller. Your cooperation is noted. We'll take it from here." With a curt nod, she turned away, blank_blank. The investigation was unleashed. Yellow tape cordoned off the mine. A forensic team, clad in white Tyvek suits that made them look like astronauts on an alien world, began meticulous work. Nick and Toby retreated. Nick felt a familiar detachment. He had done his part. But he couldn't shake the feeling they were missing something. They were searching for fingerprints, for DNA microscopic clues to build a case. But Nick's training wasn't about what a person left behind. It was about how a person survived. He watched a young forensic tech photograph the chamber. The tech was thorough, but his focus was only on the ground, on the disturbed soil. Nick's eyes were drawn higher. "Tom," he said quietly as the sheriff came over. "What is it, Nick? That recess? Tell them to look at the walls, not just the floor." Tom frowned. "What for?" "Just tell them," Nick insisted. Tom relayed the message. A moment later, Nick saw the tech redirect his light onto the rock walls of the alcove, and that fissure up there. Nick told Tom, pointing to a spot near the ceiling of the main chamber. "It looks like a natural crack, but it's not. The edges are too clean on the inside." This time, Detective Reed walked over herself, arms crossed. "What am I supposed to be looking at, Mr. Miller?" "That crack in the rock," Nick said, pointing. "It's an air vent, a natural one. But someone widened it from the inside, chipped away at it, to improve the airflow. You don't do that for a short stay. You do that when you're planning to be somewhere for a long time." He then gestured back toward the recess. "And in the alcove, look for a pattern in the smaller rocks near the base of the wall. It's not a random pile, it's a catchment. There's a slow water drip from the ceiling there. Someone arranged those stones to channel the water, to create a small, clean pool to drink from." Detective Reed stared at him, her professional mask finally cracking with a flicker of something else. Surprise, maybe even respect. These were not the observations of a simple witness. This was the analysis of a survivor. She spoke into her radio, her instructions now specific. "Examine the fissure near the ceiling for tool marks, and in the recess, check the rock pile for signs of deliberate placement. Take water samples, swab the rocks for DNA." She turned back to Nick, her gaze direct. "You've spent time in places like this." "It wasn't a question I have," Nick said simply. "Blank, blank." They stood in silence for 20 minutes. Then, the voice of the forensic team leader crackled over Reed's radio. "Detective, you were right. We have tool marks on the fissure. Looks like it was widened with a small rock hammer or similar object. And the rocks in the alcove were definitely arranged deliberately. We found trace DNA consistent with saliva on the stones around the water pool. Someone was living in here for a long time." A heavy silence fell between them. The technical findings confirmed what Nick's instincts had told him. This wasn't just a place where Robin Miller had been. It was a place where she had survived, day after day, week after week. Detective Reed's entire demeanor toward Nick changed. The professional distance was gone, replaced by focused collaboration. "What else do you see?" she asked, her voice low. The search had now become a reconstruction of a life lived in darkness. The evidence they found painted a heartbreaking picture. Scratches on the wall, hidden behind a loose rock, formed a crude calendar of more than 700 marks. A small pile of tattered blankets, faded wrappers from granola bars that had been discontinued over a year ago. Every discovery confirmed two terrible truths. Robin had been kept alive in this cold, dark hole for at least 2 years, and she was no longer here. The lack of any recent evidence, the age of the food wrappers, the undisturbed dust, it all pointed to the fact that she had been moved. Anhate, blank, underscore, blank. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the trees, Detective Reed stood beside Nick, looking at the yellow tape. 2 years, quote, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Her parents held a memorial service last spring. Most of the town believed she was gone. She looked at Nick today. You gave them the first piece of real hope they've had since she disappeared. Nick didn't feel like he had delivered hope. He felt like he had only confirmed the depth of a nightmare. He looked past the crime scene, past the flashing lights and into the vast, darkening wilderness. The mine was just the beginning. Robin was out there, somewhere in these mountains, and the ghost of 2 years felt like it was finally beginning to stir. Blank, underscore, blank. The hours bled into one another in the cold, sterile light of the FBI's forensic lamps. The mood was grim. They had collected samples and documented every inch of the space, but the trail was old. Nick felt the familiar pull of helplessness. He needed to touch the problem, to see it with his own eyes. I need to see the evidence photos again, he said to Reed, his voice quiet but firm. Reed nodded, gesturing to a tablet. Nick picked it up and retreated to a corner. Toby, sensing his distress, came to lay his heavy head on Nick's knee, a warm, grounding pressure. Nick swiped through the digital files, searching for a mistake, a small detail, a single thread out of place. He stopped on a wide shot of the alcove. Near the tattered pile of blankets, there was a single flat stone, propped up at an odd angle. It was deliberate. He waited for Detective Reed to emerge. Detective, he said the alcove. There's a flat stone leaning against the back wall near the bedding area. It's not a natural fall. It's been placed there. Reed's eyes narrowed. She spoke into her radio. A tech moved the stone aside. Behind it, tucked into a small dark crevice, was a bundle wrapped in oilskin, secured with twine. A hush fell over the clearing. Blank, underscore, blank. Inside the brightly lit mobile command unit, the air was thick with anticipation. The forensic team leader cut the twine and unfolded the waterproof wrapping. Inside was a simple spiral notebook, the kind a child would use for school. It's a diary. Reed breathed. On the first page, in the large, looping handwriting of a young child, were the words, "The Story of the Princess in the Dark Cave" by Robin Miller. What followed was not just a collection of evidence. It was a gateway into a child's soul. Detective Reed began to read aloud, her professional voice softening with raw, undisguised emotion. The early entries were filled with stark terror. Day 30. I think the Shadow King told me today that nobody is looking for me anymore. I told him he was a liar. But when he's gone, the dark whispers that maybe he's right. The dark is hungry. It eats all the happy thoughts. Nick felt a cold fist clench in his stomach. This was the weapon of the captor. The slow, methodical erosion of hope. But then, the tone of the diary began to change. Day 120. Maybe the princess in the dark cave was not afraid today. She knows a secret. She knows the Queen of Light is coming for her. The Queen is the most powerful in the land. She carries a sword made of moonbeams that can cut through any shadow. The Shadow King builds his walls of stone and lies, but he cannot stop the Queen of Light. She is on her way. Reed paused. Her mother's name is Helen, she said softly. Blonde hair, blue eyes. The diary was Robin's shield, her sword. Unable to fight back physically, she had waged a war in her imagination, transforming her mother into a mythical hero, her captor into a fairy tale villain, and herself into a princess whose rescue was a certainty. This notebook was the testament of a spirit that refused to be extinguished. The fantasy continued, growing more detailed, more vibrant. Day 400. The Shadow King was angry. His voice was like rocks grinding together, but I didn't cry. I closed my eyes and I saw the Queen of Light riding on her great white horse, Silverwind. She said that even in the darkest cave, a single candle can light the way home. I am her candle, blank, underscore, blank. Finally, they reached the last entry. The handwriting was rushed, shaky. The date at the top simply said, "The day the mountain cried. The thunder is a monster, and it's trying to break the mountain. The walls are crying. The Shadow King is scared. I can hear it in his voice. He keeps looking at the water coming in. It's a little river now on the floor. He said we have to go. He said the mountain is angry, and we have to leave the gray castle forever. He is packing things in a hurry. He is yelling. I am scared, but I am also not. Maybe the Queen of Light sent the storm to break down the walls." That was the end. The flash floods, Sheriff Jenkins said, heavy with realization. There was a brutal storm system that stalled over this range late that spring, about 3 months ago. It would have flooded this mine in a matter of hours. The final piece fell into place. The storm had been their salvation and their curse. It had forced the kidnapper to move Robin. But in his haste, he had not known, or not cared, about the diary Robin had hidden. It was the one mistake he had made. Reed closed her eyes for a moment, then looked at Nick, fueled by a fierce, personal fire. He was forced out. She said he had to move her in a panic. That means he may have gotten careless. This child fought for her own sanity for 2 years in the dark. She left us a map of her soul. Nick nodded, his gaze distant. He wasn't just looking for a missing girl named Robin anymore. He was looking for the princess in the dark cave. He was joining the Queen of Light. He was going to help her find her candle and bring her home. Cool. Blank. Underscore. Blank. The mobile command unit, a hub of cutting-edge technology, had run into a wall made of crayon and a child's imagination. A high-resolution scan of the last page of Robin's diary was projected. A crude, lopsided castle, labeled Castle of the Gay Bearded Giant. From it, a winding, jagged path was named the Trail of Fear. For 3 hours, the analysts tried to force logic upon it, overlaying it on topographical surveys. running software to identify geological formations. The result was always the same: nothing. It's a fantasy, one analyst sighed. The geographic markers are inconsistent. It's a drawing of how she felt, not what she saw. Reed was frustrated. Her career was built on data, on the cold hard lines of fact. This map had none. Blank, underscore, blank. Nick, sitting quietly in a corner with Toby's head resting on his boot, had listened to the failed attempts to impose order on a child's narrative of survival. He knew they were asking the wrong questions. "Detective," he said, his voice calm. "Can I see it again?" The original Nick stood over the drawing, his large, calloused finger tracing the lines without touching the page. He wasn't looking at it like an analyst. He was looking at it with the empathy of a fellow prisoner. The team had looked for structures. Nick looked for people. Who in these mountains was a giant? Not in size, but in presence. Someone reclusive, intimidating. A figure of local legend who lived apart from the world. A man a child would see as an ogre in a fairy tale. His eyes opened. Hemlock. He said, the name a quiet revelation. "There's a man, we call him Old Man Hemlock. His real name is Jedediah Stone," Nick explained, his mind working quickly. "He's a recluse, a survivalist. Built his cabin decades ago. Has a long, wild gray beard. The local kids tell stories about him. They say he's a giant who lives in the woods." Sheriff Jenkins nodded. Jedediah Stone. "He's a strange one, that he keeps to himself. But his cabin, it's one of the most isolated in the county." Reed's focus sharpened. This was the first tangible lead, and the trail she asked, the trail of fear. "If you want to get to Hemlock's cabin, there are two ways," Nick continued, his confidence growing. "The long way or the shortcut. Right here." He pointed to the map. "You follow the Black Creek tributary. It's not a trail. The creek bed is shallow, full of slick, moss-covered boulders and sudden drops. For a child forced to walk it, especially in the dark, it would be a trail of fear." Nick's logic was not based on data, but on a profound, intuitive understanding of the story Robin was trying to tell. He had translated her fear into geography. "All right," Reed said, making a decision. "Let's listen to the story. Gear up. We're going to pay a visit to the giant's castle. Blank, underscore, blank." The journey to the cabin was tense. Reed opted for a small, quiet team. As they navigated the treacherous creek bed, every slippery stone and difficult climb confirmed Nick's theory. After an hour of grueling progress, they saw it. The cabin, exactly as Nick had described. Small, sturdy, blending into the dark forest. Smoke curled from the chimney. Someone was home, or had been very recently. They approached with the silence of ghosts. The cabin was too quiet. On Reed's signal, the team stormed the cabin clear. The call came back, laced with confusion. The cabin was empty, but the air was still warm. On a crude wooden table, a bowl of oatmeal sat half-eaten, a spoon resting in it. The porridge was cold, but it hadn't been sitting there for long. And lying on the pillow of a small cot was a small, hand-carved wooden bird. The sight of it hit Nick like a physical blow. It was nearly identical to the one he had found in the rubble in Kandahar. His breath hitched. This was a message he understood. They were close. So painfully, terrifyingly close. The fire had been out for less than 24 hours. They hadn't just found a new location. They had just missed them. Robin had been here yesterday. The cold case had just become a live pursuit. "He'll be back," Nick growled. "This place is a homestead, not just a hideout. He didn't take everything he needs. No one leaves." Reed commanded into her radio. "Establish a perimeter. We're not searching anymore. We're hunting." Quote. Blank, underscore, blank. The next hours were a masterclass in patience. Nick, Toby, and 2 agents took up a position overlooking the cabin. As dusk settled, a figure emerged from the tree line. It was him, Robin's gay, bearded giant. Jedediah Stone was a man who seemed to have been grown from the mountain itself. He moved with slow, deliberate confidence, carrying a rifle and a freshly caught rabbit. Toby, lying flat beside Nick, emitted a low, barely audible growl, a signal only Nick could feel through the ground. The team waited, letting him get closer. He was 20 yards from the cabin door when Reed's voice cut through the twilight stillness. FBI! "Drop the weapon, Jedediah!" The man froze, then slowly placed the rifle on the ground, raising his empty hands. The takedown was swift and silent. Jedediah Stone was in handcuffs, his face a mask of serene composure. "Where is she?" Jedediah Reed asked, her voice cutting. A slow, chilling smile spread across his face. "You speak a name from the broken world," he rasped. "We are not her captors. We are her saviors." He leaned forward, his pale eyes burning with intensity. "We have removed her from the poison. We are giving her the gift of purity. She is being reborn, blank, underscore, blank." Nick stood nearby, staring at the Shadow King from Robin's diary, a man who had built a fortress of philosophy around his own madness. "There are others with you," Reed stated, changing tactics. "Who are they?" Jedediah's smile widened. "Others who see the sickness. You will not find them. They know the mountains in a way you never will." He looked directly at Nick, his gaze dismissive. "Even your soldier there, he still serves the cage. He doesn't understand what it means to be free of it." Then, a sudden, chilling realization dawned on Sarah Reed. Jedediah had come back for a reason. He was expected somewhere else. He was on a supply run. She whispered, her head snapping up, eyes wide with urgency. He had a schedule, a rendezvous. When he doesn't show up, they'll know. They'll know he's been caught. They'll know we're here. A wave of cold dread washed over Nick. Jedediah's capture wasn't the end of a chapter. It was the starting pistol for the real race. Sarah Reed's voice became sharp, ringing with command. "This is a live pursuit. Our clock started the moment we put handcuffs on him. They will run, and they will take her with them. Our new mission is to find her before she disappears forever, quote, blank, underscore, blank." The ticking clock was a hammer in the silence of the command unit. The fugitives were scattering into the vast wilderness with Robin. Their only lead came from a frantic search of Jedediah's cabin, a hand-drawn map tucked inside an old book, marking a trail to a riverbend labeled simply Camp Hope. They moved with frantic speed. They found the site exactly where the map indicated, and their hope died there. The place was a ruin, unused for a year. It was a decoy, a ghost camp. Jedediah had left the map deliberately, a final act of mockery designed to send them on a fool's errand. They had lost precious time. Back in the command unit, despair had taken root. The trail had gone cold again, and this time it felt final. Nick couldn't stand the sterile, hopeless atmosphere. He picked up the evidence photos again, Toby's heavy head resting on his knee. He wasn't looking for a written clue. He was looking for a mistake. He stopped on a wide shot of the cabin's interior. Hanging on the wall was a coil of rope. Nick zoomed in on the knot. It was a taut-line hitch. "It's a friction hitch," Nick whispered to himself. "An adjustable loop used to secure lines under tension. It's a practical, specific, and incredibly useful knot, and it's a favorite among Forest Service workers and wilderness firefighters. It's a ranger's knot, blank, underscore, blank." Nick's mind raced. He swiped to another file, a close-up of a torn scrap of paper found in a trash bin. On it was a single cryptic phrase, "Supplies for the high post." The two pieces clicked together in his mind with the force of a rifle shot. "They're not on the run," Nick said to Detective Reed. "They've relocated to a final defensible position, a place they prepared a long time ago." He showed her the knot. "This is a ranger's knot. Jedediah didn't tie this. Someone with professional forestry training did." He then pointed to the topographical map. "Where is the highest, most defensible point with a man-made structure in this entire sector?" Reed's eyes followed his finger. She zoomed in on the digital map display. There, marked for a decommissioned structure, was a single point on the highest peak for 50 miles, Osprey Peak. She whispered, "The old ranger station." "It's a fortress," Nick corrected her, his voice low and certain. "It has a 360-degree view of every approach. It is the perfect high post." The despair evaporated, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. "Get me everything we have on that station," Reed commanded. "The race isn't over." Nick looked at the peak on the map. This was the end game. The giant's castle had been a way station. This was the dragon's lair. Go, blank, underscore, go, blank. The ascent to Osprey Peak was a silent, vertical battle. They moved under the cover of a pre-dawn gloom, the air thin and bitingly cold. Nick felt a grim sense of homecoming. This stealth, this tension, this slow, deliberate advance on a high-value target. This was a language his body had never forgotten. They saw it first through binoculars. The decommissioned ranger station, a skeleton of its former self, but with subtle signs of life. They surrounded the structure. On Reed's signal, the team breached the main door. Clear! The call came back, laced with a sharp edge of disappointment. The single room was stark and empty, but the crushing weight of another near miss descended on the room. Outside, Toby was not calm. He had been posted with Nick to cover the rear of the station, and his focus had shifted. He wasn't watching the tree line. He was staring intently at a set of old, heavy wooden doors set almost flush with the earth. A storm cellar. A low whine started in Toby's chest. He began to pace, his agitation growing. He scratched at the edge of the cellar doors, his focus absolute. Nick knelt beside him. The dog was trembling. This wasn't the scent of a person. This was the scent of pure, undiluted panic, Sarah. Nick's voice was a harsh whisper. "Down here. Underneath. Blank, underscore, blank." As they moved toward the cellar doors, they heard a muffled sound from within, the scraping of a bolt being drawn back. The door burst open. A young woman scrambled out, her face pale with cornered animal terror. This was Cassie Stone, Jedediah's accomplice, and she was dragging a small, terrified child behind her by the arm. It was Robin. She was so small, smaller than Nick could have imagined, a thin, pale girl with huge, dark eyes. And in that instant, Nick's world fractured. The Colorado mountaintop dissolved, replaced by the acrid smell of smoke and cordite. He wasn't looking at Robin Miller, he was looking at Anila. The two images, separated by a decade and a half a world, merged into one unbearable, clarifying vision. Robin's terrified face was Anila's. The hand gripping her arm was the chaos that was about to swallow her whole. And the voice that screamed inside Nick's head was primal. "Not again!" All the grief, all the guilt, all the years of running from the ghost of Kandahar were channeled into this single, perfect moment of action. He moved. He didn't think. He simply reacted. His body remembered its old, lethal grace. In 2 long strides, he crossed the space, placing his own body directly between Cassie and Robin. He created a living wall, a barrier of absolute resolve. The move was so swift, so unexpected, that it broke Cassie's momentum. In that split second of hesitation, the other agents were on her, subduing her with a swift, efficient takedown. Nick slowly knelt, making himself smaller, less threatening, shielding Robin from the sight of Cassie being handcuffed. He didn't speak. Robin was frozen, her eyes locked on him, filled with a terror that had known no end for 2 years. Toby, released from his duty, approached slowly. He whined softly, a sound of profound sympathy, and lay down a few feet away, simply offering his calm presence. Nick finally found his voice. It was rough, thick with an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. "Robin," he said, "the name a prayer? It's over. You're safe now." For a long moment, she just stared. Then her face, a mask of terror for so long, began to crumble. Her lower lip trembled. A single tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek. Then another. The small, frail body was racked with a silent sob, the first release of a grief held captive for 1,000 days. The distant rhythmic chop of a helicopter's rotors began to echo through the mountains. The medevac was coming. The Queen of Light, in the form of a haunted soldier, a faithful dog, and a team of determined agents, had finally broken through the walls of the Shadow King's castle. Nick remained kneeling, a silent guardian, The war that had raged inside him for so long had finally, mercifully gone quiet. The mission was complete. The world Robin returned to was a universe away from the one she had left. But for a child whose senses had been recalibrated by 2 years of darkness and fear, the hospital's gentle touch was a terrifying intrusion. Robin did not speak. She communicated only through the desperate grip she kept on her mother's arm, a silent, terrified plea not to be left alone. Nick and Tom Jenkins stood in the hallway. "She's not talking," Tom said heavily. "The docs say it could be weeks or months. We have to give her time. Time is something we may not have." Reed countered Jedediah Stone as lawyered up and silent. "We need to know who his accomplice was. The one who tied that knot as if on cue." Reed's phone buzzed. That was the DA's office. Cassie Stone just asked to make a full statement. Blank, underscore, blank. The interrogation room was a cold gray box. Cassie Stone's confession tumbled out. A story of manipulation, misplaced loyalty, and terrible mistakes. She told them about her uncle Jedediah and how his fanatical hatred of the modern world had consumed her. But it wasn't his idea. Cassie choked out, "Not really." He had the anger, the why, but he didn't have the how. She gave him that. "Who is she?" Cassie Reed prompted Sarah. Cassie whispered Sarah Evans. The file came up instantly. Sarah Evans, 39, a brilliant botanist who had worked for the U.S. Forest Service as a conservation officer for 7 years. Why would a respected scientist get involved in this, Reed asked. Cassie's story then turned to the heart of the tragedy. Sarah, a dedicated officer, had lost her husband and 6-year-old daughter to a drunk driver. She broke. Cassie said, "The man who did it got out of jail in 3 years." Sarah saw it as a symptom of the whole world's disease. Jedediah found her in that grief. He offered her a reason. He told her it wasn't just a drunk driver who killed her family. It was the whole sick, broken world that let him keep driving. And he offered her a way to fight back. Sarah Evans, with her intimate professional knowledge of the backcountry, had become the architect of their plan. She was the one who knew about the decommissioned mine, the perfect fortress on Osprey Peak. She was the brains, the strategist, the one who tied the ranger's knot. Nye blank, underscore blank. The manhunt for Sarah Evans was swift and silent. A tactical team was dispatched by helicopter to a remote research cabin in the Uncompahgre National Forest. Nick, Reed, and Toby were on that helicopter. There was no siege, no confrontation. They breached the door to find Sarah Evans sitting at a simple wooden table. A detailed, topographical map spread out before her, staring blankly at the wall. She was an ordinary-looking woman, utterly hollow, burned out by a grief so profound it had become a fire that consumed everything else. As they put her in handcuffs, her gaze fell on Nick. He saw no remorse in her eyes, only the vast, empty wilderness of a soul that had lost its way. Jedediah was the ideologue, Cassie was the coerced muscle, but Sarah was the true tragedy. The brilliant mind shattered by loss and remade into an instrument of cruelty. The 3 points of the dark triangle had finally collapsed. Const blank, underscore, blank. 6 months had passed. 6 months for the seasons to turn, for the quiet, methodical machinery of justice to run its course. Jedediah Stone and Sarah Evans, unrepentant to the last, were sentenced to life in prison. Cassie Stone received a lesser sentence, the court acknowledging the deep manipulation she had endured. The legal chapter was closed. And in his cabin, Nick Miller was no longer a ghost. The Spartan solitude of his home had been softened by small, almost imperceptible changes. A vibrant, crayon-drawn picture of a gray dog and a bearded man was held to his refrigerator. His quiet routine now included regular visits from the Miller family. The silence in his cabin was no longer the silence of isolation, but the silence of peace. The healing had been a slow, delicate process. After Robin came home, Nick had kept his distance. Then, one day, Mark Miller had shown up at his door. "She asked about you." Mark had said, "She asked about the man with the gray dog. She's still not talking much, but she asked." And so the visits began. He never pushed her to speak. He simply existed in her space, a safe, steady figure. The day she had walked over and silently offered Toby her favorite toy was a victory greater than any medal Nick had ever earned. 3 months ago, Mark and Helen had asked him to be Robin's godfather. I'm not. I'm not that kind of man, he had stammered. Helen, her eyes shining with tears, had put her hand on his arm. Nick, you are exactly that kind of man. Quote, blank, underscore, blank. Today they were on the trail together, not a treacherous creek bed, but a wide, sun-dappled path that followed the gentle curve of a laughing stream. Robin, now a confident 10-year-old, walked just ahead, her hand occasionally resting on Toby's thick fur. The terror that had haunted her eyes had receded, replaced by a quiet curiosity. Nick had made a promise. He would not teach her about survival, about snares and shelters. The mountains had been her prison. He would not let them become a place of fear. He would teach her their magic instead. Stop for a minute, Robin, he said softly. Close your eyes. Just listen. Don't think, just listen. Tell me what you hear. Toby sat at her feet. The water, she whispered. It sounds like it's talking. It is, Nick affirmed. What else? The wind, she said, a small smile touching her lips. It sounds different in the pine trees than it does in the aspen trees. It's a lower sound in the pines, a whisper. That's right, you're listening. You're hearing the mountain's real voice. He was helping her replace the memories of a cold, dark cave with the warmth of the sun on her face. They reached a small clearing that overlooked the valley. Robin sat on a large, sun-warmed boulder, and Toby immediately rested his head on her lap. Nick thought of Vanilla. The memory no longer came with the sharp, stabbing pain of guilt. It was a gentle ache now, a profound and lasting sorrow. He hadn't been able to save her, but the ghost of that failure had driven him to Toby, to the mine, to Robin. He had honored Anila's memory in the most powerful way he could. He had saved this child, Nick. Robin's voice was small but clear. The mountains don't feel scary today. That's because you're not their prisoner anymore, he said. You're their friend. Because you and Toby are here. She corrected him gently. He felt a warmth spread through his chest, a feeling he had long thought was lost to him forever. He was no longer a ghost in his own life. He was a godfather, a protector, a friend. He and Toby, two old soldiers, had long ago finished their war, but they had finally found their peace, not in solitude, but on this quiet patch of earth they had chosen to protect. The bond between a veteran and their dog is a silent promise, a quiet vow to help heal the wounds that no one else can see. Nick and Toby's journey is a powerful reminder that sometimes, in the mission to save another soul, we end up rescuing ourselves.